A nation's economy is not just targeted by its enemies, it can be strangled by allies using tools that leave no visible wound. When the blockade begins, no shot is fired, but everything stops. On April 13th, the US Navy took stations around Iran, and within 36 hours, reports claimed the nation's entire seaborne trade had halted. But what kind of victory is it if the price extends to the world's fuel supply too? We have a strange habit of calling this progress: blockade, sanctions, embargo. We think of them as civilized alternatives to bombing, and maybe in some way they are. The rubble stays in place, the buildings stand, the infrastructure hums along. But this is a mistake about what a blockade actually does. A blockade is not an alternative to war. It is a different kind of war. It just kills more slowly. Let me be clear about what happened in mid-April 2026. The United States government, having failed in 21 hours of negotiations in Islamabad, made a decision. Diplomacy had stopped. Airstrikes had paused. The choice left was to strangle. Over 10,000 sailors, marines, and Air Force personnel, more than a dozen warships, over 100 aircraft, all of it arrayed around the ports of a nation that exports roughly 90% of its economy by sea. By the morning of April 14th, 8 tankers had been intercepted. All of them complied without boarding. No shots, no drama. Just the quiet work of making a choice: turn back or risk everything you have. And they turned back. The economic impact was instant. Brent crude jumped 7 to 8% on the announcement. Oil contracts climbed above $100 per barrel. In Baltimore, municipal water treatment systems began rationing chemicals. In India, fertilizer prices rose overnight. In Europe, energy bills ticked upward. The blockade of one nation rippled outward, touching the poor and the ordinary everywhere the world trades. But here is the thing people do not understand about blockades. They are the oldest tool of economic war, and they work with a precision that bombs cannot match. There is a first principle that runs through all of this, a pattern so old that it predates gunpowder itself. To understand what is happening now, we have to see the principle underneath it. The first principle is this: if a nation depends on the sea for its survival, then command of the sea is command over whether that nation lives or dies. Not in battle, in time. Control the ports, and you control the breath of the economy. The second principle is that blockade works best when it is distant. The older navies, the ones that hugged the coastline, they paid terribly for it. Mines, small boats, shore batteries, coastal defenses that turn a blockade into a siege. But modern navies learned something different. You do not need to be close. You can position your ships thousands of miles away in international waters and still intercept anything bound for the enemy port. The technology of surveillance and pursuit means you can enforce your will at range, outside the enemy's defensive envelope. The third, and the most misunderstood, is that blockade works on a nation only when that nation has no alternatives. If the goods can come overland from trading partners through different routes, the blockade fails. But Iran, like many naval powers before it, has based its entire economy on one thing: oil exports by sea. 90%, not 85, not 70, 90. When you build your survival on a single export, you are not building an economy, you are building a hostage. This is not new strategy, it is the oldest strategy, and it has a history written in blood. 400 years ago, the Royal Navy faced a problem. Spain had an empire and the sea power to protect it. But Spain's survival depended on the galleons that brought gold and sugar from the New World. The British understood something that Spanish commanders did not. You do not have to defeat the Spanish fleet in battle. You only have to make sure it never docks. You only have to wait. The British began a campaign we now call distant blockade. They positioned their ships not at Spanish harbors, but in the shipping lanes hundreds of miles out to sea. They waited. They did not force a battle. They made the choice for Spain. Either lose your galleons to capture or abandon your empire. Spain eventually chose the latter. It took years. It was not dramatic, but it worked. The pattern repeated during the American Civil War. The Union Navy did not have the ships to occupy every southern port, so instead it patrolled the gaps between them. Any ship trying to bring cotton out or supplies in was interdicted. The South was not conquered on battlefields, it was starved. The economy collapsed before the armies did. The generals fought harder and harder as their supply lines thinned and their soldiers grew hungrier, and their options narrowed to none. By the end, the blockade had become more devastating than any battle. The casualty figures were lower in the military sense, but when you count the civilians who died from starvation, from disease brought on by malnourishment, from the social collapse that followed economic collapse, the numbers were staggering. The Union blockade of the Confederacy killed no one in a single dramatic event, but spread across years of slow strangulation, it killed more than Gettysburg did. This is what we forget when we call blockade civilized. We have not made war more humane, we have just made it slower, and in doing so, we have spread the suffering across more people, for longer. Now, in April 2026, the principle repeats. A nation dependent on seaborne oil exports, a distant blockade enforced by the world's greatest naval power, a choice that was made not because it was the only option, but because it was the option chosen. The White House announced a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz itself, a move that would have been a direct violation of international maritime law. But the operational order that actually came down narrowed the target. Iranian ports only, not the strait. This is the quiet move that allowed the blockade to survive legal scrutiny. It is not a war against the strait. It is just a very large presence around Iran. But the effect is the same. Tankers do not risk it. Merchants do not file manifests. The economy does not move. And within 2 days, all of it, the 70-year-old apparatus of Iranian oil exports, had ceased. The world watched, and the world did not move. The governments that might have resisted, the UK, Germany, Spain, even Turkey, they offered public objections and private acceptance. The French and the British organized what they called a parallel peace mission, a way to save face, a way to say, we are doing something. But no one broke the blockade. No one sent a convoy. No one tested the line. It took no invasion. It took no bombing. It took no visible war. Just ships in international waters and the quiet power of choice. Comply or watch your nation's blood stop flowing. We like to think we have made war more civilized, but we have just learned to kill the economy instead of the body. And when you kill the economy, you kill the body anyway, just more slowly and to more people, and in ways that are harder to see. The blockade has never failed when applied by a power with true command of the sea against a nation with no alternatives. Not once in 400 years. And Iran, like the Spain of 400 years ago, has made a choice, or inherited a choice its predecessors made, to base everything on one thing. Whether this pattern is being repeated here, whether the blockade will hold, whether it will achieve its aims, these are questions for history to judge. But the shape of the pattern is unmistakable. What we face is not new, it is old. We have done this before. We know how it ends. A nation does not have to lose in battle to lose completely. Sometimes it loses standing still, while ships circle in the deep water and wait. Sometimes the war is not what we can see. Sometimes it is what we cannot. the absence of the things that make a nation live. We have forgotten this lesson between wars. We forget it again, and the ships take their stations. The true cost of a blockade is never counted in the moment. It is counted in time. War by strangulation costs everyone.